Right. All right, everybody. um, Good morning. Good morning. Um, there's a lot to to say. There's a lot to say in this video. 100%. So the one of the things that I've noticed with grind culture is that we have this symptom of unsolicited advice giving. Now, what makes this unsolicited advice giving is ironically captured in our loved ones. What does that mean? It means that the unsolicited advice giving that truly affects us, that truly begins to worry us, are the people that are closest to us. So, for example, I actually really enjoyed this one example that Dawood has kind of left me with. Of course, not purposely, but out of just mere anecdote. Dawood had a boss that uh, wanted to give him advice on his YouTube channel. And what's funny about this is that I've also received advice about my YouTube channel and what to do with my YouTube channel to get more views and gain more popularity. As you can see, right? I didn't take that advice, and Dawood, my dear friend Dawood, didn't take that advice either, right? So you can tell that unsolicited advice only has so much of a power, because if it's not really somebody that we instantly have a kind of affection towards, um, advice giving it becomes kind of moot in itself, when a stranger sort of gives it to us, or a stranger that feels like, or a stranger that we feel immediately does not understand. um, so these kind of unsolicited advice givings, um, we can we probably find them mostly annoying, but we also find in most cases that we don't really listen to these advices. Now, if we were to shift to advice that is given from your mother or your father or your siblings or those that you deem as close to you, that has a whole entirely different experience, and it's much more difficult to dismiss. And the reason why that may be more difficult to dismiss is because you risk what you risk in that dismissal is possibly hurting the one or worrying the one that is giving you the advice. Um, so, for example, this isn't like the best example, but it's a kind of example where, um, you know, my mother asks me, uh, you know, what I picked as a major, right? And my major is religious studies. And I believe one of her first comments when I told her this was, what can you do with that? um, Now, I was immediately prepared to answer, but my answer was something that I self-constructed to sort of appease the the worry. It was already a mastered answer to basically block off any possible anecdotes or advice giving for what I should do. Um, Typically these conversations go in a couple of ways. Either they say something like, "Oh, you can't do anything with that. You should have done," etc. Right? There's still time to change and do this. And so that way you can secure your livelihood and so on. But what I've noticed about unsolicited advice giving is that it immediately perpetuates a kind of race to secure your livelihood. However, what's really ironic about securing your livelihood is that securing your livelihood, you know, this concept is in itself never satisfactory. And this is the irony of it, is that even if you get there, right, wherever you intend to go, and I've heard, um, you know, for some reason I've stumbled upon these interviews where um, very rich or what we would consider as very wealthy people would be secure. However, despite their security, um, they still worry about how can they maintain their livelihood. And so what's interesting about this notion of maintaining your livelihood is that actually the very maintaining of your livelihood is trying to do the same thing, trying to secure your livelihood, right? Everybody wants security, whatever they deem as secure. And again, what's funny about this is that this is virtually impossible. And the reason why that is because, like I said before, even if you could uh, get to where you want to be, for example, um, if you want to be a doctor, uh, you know, becoming a doctor, finally, you think that you're set. You think that now, finally, I can live the life I want to live. But what's ironic about this idea, about finally I get to live the life I want to live, is that instantly you become preoccupied with another idea, meaning you start thinking, how can I maintain uh, what I have, right? Because not only is there a threshold that you want to reach, you are instantly consumed with wanting to maintain that threshold. You know, for example, if you were poor before, you don't want to be poor again. um, and the same thing with the threshold that you just met, right? If you just bought this house, obviously you don't want to lose it. You don't want to immediately have to sell it. Um, that just would seem so fruitless. And so we are constantly preoccupied with maintaining, but this maintaining is always an illusion because really we're always just trying to secure the livelihood. So even though we've met the conditions themselves are still demanding of us something, right? It's not the fact that you can now afford the house. It's the fact that the house itself is constantly asking for the mortgage, you know? And so, in that sense, you are constantly worried about maintaining your livelihood. So, security, I feel like we can confidently say security is probably one of the biggest symptoms for grind culture. I want to feel secure in my livelihood. I want to feel secure in my romantic relationships. I want to feel secure in, literally everything else. So there seems to be this obsession with security. And this very obsession with security is exactly what gets the wheel turning. you know, it's exactly the hamster wheel that prevents us from discerning what is actually happening. So, again, the main symptom, the obsession with security. And this obsession with security is difficult to get rid of. And the reason why this obsession with security is difficult to get rid of is that, like I said before, the people that are near you, closest to you, can't help but express themselves to you and say that you should do this because they also want you to have a secured livelihood. And this very encouragement to secure a good livelihood is also ironically what starts some people to go on that route because they don't want to disappoint um, their mother, or they don't want to worry their family or their wife or anything like this. So it's not a clean and cut thing where we can just simply ignore, in most cases, the unsolicited advice, because ignoring the unsolicited advice is not detached from itself, from the one that is giving the advice. um, so the people that have immediate influence, like our family members or our close friends, um, whether or not they are giving us unsolicited advice, it is very difficult to combat those issues, because what ends up happening is that even though you can disagree with their advice, they're convinced that it is the best solution. Um, and if your loved one is worried about about you having a secure livelihood, then it becomes a difficult conversation to have, because essentially, if you don't do it, you are thrusting this vicious vicious cycle of worry upon them, right? They're going to you may not even be able to comfort them, because you'd be like, look, you know I decided to do this, I decided to take this risk, and the person may have a very difficult time with that, because one, They either feel that you won't succeed, you'll fail, and they don't want to see you fail. They want to see you succeed. They want to see you secure your livelihood, live a good life. This is the hopes of every parent possible. And even with friends, this is also a very similar hope. They don't want you to have to struggle, essentially. So, this symptomatic issue of security, advice giving, unsolicited advice giving obviously roots with worry. It has a kind of anxiety to it. Um, and so, yeah, it's not easy to simply ignore like the advices that we typically are, given, like those from, the supermarket or those from like people that we work with or anything like that. It's not easy to dismiss, especially if we like the person. It's not easy to dismiss. And again, even if it is easy to dismiss, what is frustrating about that is you can't convince them to not worry about the issue that they feel would solve your problems. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that despite you thinking it's not a problem, right? Like your one of your family members may say, "Oh well, you should do this because this might happen to you. Um, you need to be ready. You need to be prepared in case this fails." Um, and you may dismiss it. However, they can't dismiss it. They can't dismiss it, and so that will be the immediate conflict that will always perpetuate between you and the other person. Um, and this may even be more specifically difficult to do because if you have a family and let's say you're a mother or a father, a adult with some type of responsibility, um, if the other adult disagrees with you and disagrees with the risk, then this makes for a difficult conversation because you may feel that it's not, you know, you may feel that it's not a big deal, but of course your partner feels like it's a big deal. And so I'm trying to make this as realistic as possible and really show you the binds that occur and the frustrating elements that happen because really if I'm being realistic about all these kind of meetings with the fights between loved ones and friends and so on is that these fights don't really have solutions. The only solution that ever comes, if there is one, is that one either one person gives in to the advice to simply appease the other one, or it becomes mutually agreed that I'm not going to do what you want me to do, and the other person realizes that. But most cases, it would seem it's a constant, but I would say most cases is that it's a constant struggle to express your position about why you've made that choice, and then constantly trying to shove off the unsolicited advice and and so on. So I feel like that the latter, the one I just mentioned, is probably the most real and visceral conflict in our daily lives. And of course, which this ironically can give us anxiety. This can give us anxiety because the moment that somebody else begins to worry about us is that we begin we begin to worry immediately over, one, we might end up worrying about them. We start worrying about not disappointing them, worrying about falling into the traps that they pointed out that may be dangerous in our decisions. We start worrying about, you know, how they will live with us making this decision. Um, and that is a part of real and visceral worry. And it's that kind of worry that it's not easy to avoid. It's not easy to avoid at all because again, in most of these situations, and especially in cases of decisions that affect the entire family or friendship or relationship, I think I would rephrase it as that is that decisions that possibly affect the entire relationship is what is extremely troublesome and worrying. Right now, you may never have had a worry in the first place, but it's by virtue of this relationship that you begin to worry. And so basically what I'm saying is that there is a twofold symptom that occurs, that runs this wheel of grind culture. And the twofold symptom that occurs is one, the securing of livelihood, right? This obsession with security. But then there's the other manifestation of, even though it may not be the security of your livelihood, it becomes the security of this relationship. So, by mere virtue of this relationship, I'm obsessed with trying to secure it, trying to make it a secure relationship. Because what's ironic about these conversations is that they destabilize the relationship. You have your mother worrying about you, the decisions that you're making, if they are the right decisions, if they're the correct decisions. Um, and even though you're like, yeah, I'm confident in my decisions, she doesn't need to worry about that. What may daunt on you is how it might affect your relationship if you continue to go this way. And it might worry you about how much it worries her and how much it affects her and and so on. You'd be surprised that there's decisions that you make in your life that it affects the other person more than it affects you, right? You'd be like, I decided to become a religious studies major, and then all of a sudden you see somebody act viscerally to this decision as if as if they're the ones that made it. So it's not an easy um, thing, and what I'm trying to say is there's almost practically no solution to this, and if there is a solution to it, obviously it's going to be on our part, the ones that are making the decisions and the ones that are leading our life, basically. Because if I would say this, if you're the one that is capable of realizing what I am saying right now within your own relationships and within your own striving for the security of your livelihood, then I would say, in a very clear fashion, obviously the responsibility is on you because you acknowledge and you're aware of what is happening. And so in this case, we're the ones giving the responsibility because we have the possibility of changing our response. Now, I don't have I don't have the answer, obviously, um, but it's very clear, in my opinion, that those who are aware of these things that I am talking about, only we have the possibility of dealing and changing these dynamics, um, and facing these anxieties and so on. I would say it would be very difficult to even try to bother making sense to the ones that are worrying about you. But fundamentally, it is upon ourselves. Um, Now, obviously, we haven't addressed when worry is sincere in its nature. Worry as an indicator for you possibly going on a very destructive path, and this may be in fact a very another thing that can be difficult to discern. So, and this is something that I did not talk about, and this is something that Kierkegaard didn't even mention either. Um, where worry actually might be justified. Worry may be justified, and where worry may be justified is when you have failed to acknowledge something very how can I say this? You have failed to acknowledge the intention. Maybe that would be the best word. I don't know if that's the best word, but I'm going to say this line and maybe we can make sense of it. Is that you're unaware of the intention of why you're doing what you're doing, basically, right? And this is not of course, this is not very clear. But one of the things that may, like for example, I can only give an example because I don't think my words are gonna really capture this. But I have, because I go to school, I have a friend, and she told me one day that I'm stressing myself out, basically. That I am perpetuating my own stress because I am doing things in my academic work that I don't really need to do because essentially she said you're thinking too hard. Like you're approaching this material at such a higher level than what the course actually demands. Um, and so through her expressing this, I kind of realized like, oh, because she's like, you doing all this stuff, the kids that don't really try as much, they're probably going to get the same grade as you anyways, because fundamentally the criteria that is asked for in the course is um, sort of already below what you're doing. So essentially, she's saying to me, you're doing more than what is necessary. And in order to not stress yourself out and kind of go through these tumblings, then you need to realize that you need to cater back, or you need to pull back that obsession with wanting to have a more concrete idea or a more um, a sort of above and beyond kind of seriousness with the topic at hand. Um, and so this advice is a kind of worry because obviously she's worried about if I continue to do what I'm doing, I will continue to stress myself out and then burn out and all this other stuff, right? So in this case, you can say that a worry was justified, right? Because she pointed out to me something that I did not realize, I did not acknowledge through my immediate understanding. And so obviously this is something that, at least in the writing so far, Kierkegaard has not pointed out to us. When would worry be justified? And the only time that worry might be justified is if the person can kind of uncover, reveal um, your intentions, like your actual issue. If they can actually reveal that to you and it resonates, then I would say that despite the unsolicited advice, despite it being not provoked by you, um, you may realize that, oh, this is actually what I am doing to myself. So in those cases, I would say that even unsolicited advice has the potential to be good, um, has the potential to be constructive. But I would say in most cases that I don't think that would actually be the case. But I wouldn't dismiss unsolicited advice because, again, sometimes somebody does see something that you're doing that you don't even realize that you're doing. And so for me, I think worry has its justification in that, in hoping to reveal something. And I think obviously this is what makes it difficult with the dynamics with parents and with loved ones, is because just because they're worrying doesn't mean we should immediately dismiss them as if they don't understand our intentions. But it's possible that we don't understand our own intentions. And this is why um, we should at least give the credence to listen, despite how difficult it may be to listen and even have to hear their advice, because obviously you would feel like they don't understand, like Kierkegaard says. Obviously they don't understand, but sometimes advice giving does have its epiphanies from other people. Of course, Kierkegaard, actually, what Kierkegaard recommends with advice giving is, if you're the one giving advice, you should honor their sorrow, right? Of course, this was in retrospect to somebody mourning, struggling. But Kierkegaard doesn't give us a answer to when we're not struggling, when we feel like we're um, maybe not seeing what's happening. And in this case, we might not feel that we need need that advice. Even though, for example, even though I was stressed, I didn't really feel like I wanted anything, any kind of advice, really. Um, I just felt like this is how it is. That's how I felt. I felt like, well, this is how it is. Um, so I didn't feel like I needed any kind of advice, um, or I wasn't looking for one. But obviously, the unsolicited advice that I did get, it made me realize something. And so I think, again, like I said before, I think worry does have its justifying moments. Um, they may be, depending on your situation, they may be few and far between, honestly. Um, but I think it is this constant kind of dialogue where the person worrying may put into question your intentions. And I think if that is what is being done, then worrying may actually be constructive in some sense. Like, worrying that this person doesn't see what they see. And so, a way to interpret, for example, if my mother were to worry about um, my degree, my religious studies degree, obviously she's worried about some type of livelihood, right? But that's the very blatant understanding and of what is happening. But what is really happening is that she I'm using my mother as an example here, is that she wants you to acknowledge the risk of your situation, right? And possibly be prepared to encounter that risk. Because if you're not prepared to counter that risk, then you fully don't understand the extent to your decisions. Now, obviously, philosophically, there's a lot of bombs to uncover in that, and there's a lot of debates to be had with that, um, specifically with knowing what the risk would be. But it is good to know that fundamentally, because you make a decision, there is a risk. And we can say that worry is justified in the realm of trying to show, whether it fails or not, the risk in doing so. And so long as you're okay with taking whatever risk may be, and we may not know what that risk is, and so that is probably some of the fundamental disagreements between people and ourselves, is that they may be talking about some type of risk that we don't feel is actual. But that still doesn't necessarily dismiss the fact that there isn't a risk. It's just very possible that we don't know what that risk is. And so it may do us good to understand that even though I may not see a risk, it's important to acknowledge that whether I see it or not, and whether I know what it is or not, um, there is a risk. And so, as long as you are willing to essentially die, metaphorically, of course, for that risk, then then you can proceed as otherwise. But if you feel like you are making a decision that acquires no risk, then perhaps worry it does justify itself because it wants to show you that your decision does come with a risk. And if you accept that risk, then you know it's funny because if you acknowledge that there's a risk, then there really isn't a worry, so to speak. You're like, yes, I know that's a risk, 100%. I'm not blinded by that fact, right? And I think a lot of our loved ones give unsolicited advice, and they give um, advice that we might find unnecessary because fundamentally they worry about you not seeing something, not seeing a risk. Um, so as you can see, this whole dynamic, and then also what perpetuates the crying culture is um, very intricate. I really, basically, I approach this conversation more phenomenologically rather than talking about power, of course, it gets very difficult to talk about power phenomenologically. You have to kind of go a little bit more abstract, but um, yes, I would say phenomenologically, it comes up as, at least in grind culture, it comes up as obsessing, to kind of end this video. It comes over obsessing over security. It becomes um, obsessing over securing our relationships, whether that be appeasing the worries that kind of happen with the people that we love, and then appeasing the worries that we have over our livelihood. And then, of course, um, obviously, and then, of course, thinking about when worry is justified and when worry is maybe constructive. And I leave it in the realm of worry justifying itself to reveal a risk that you failed to acknowledge. And basically, I leave it so open as to say that if you feel like you can make a decision with no risk, then then obviously you may not understand the full extent of your decision, because every decision implies risk as such. Even the idea of taking no risk is a kind of risk in itself. And there is cases to kind of have people worried about that, because then it may show that you don't really understand your intentions behind your decision making. And so in that case, it can't be constructive. But all right. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Take care.